Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is the weekly landscape update video I do here in the garden in Raleigh, North Carolina, Zone 7B. Steph and I went out of town for a couple of weeks and this place has gone absolutely bonkers. It needs a ton of work right now. And so that you'll be seeing that in upcoming videos. Unfortunately, I don't have time right this minute to really get on it. And so we're gonna lose a little more control, which is probably a good thing for the content for the channel. I'll be about to show lots of pruning and lots of control here in the garden in the next few weeks. Some of the things that are looking great though, that's what this video is for every week. And so let's start with some of those. White wedding hydrangeas just look stunning, really. We've gotten a ton of thunderstorms, a lot of rain. I think normally on these hydrangea paniculatas, when you see the flowers, when you see the inflorescences this big, you see them flopping over, but these hold them up big and tall. And I think I may have said last week that they were kind of in peak color, but they're still not quite. They still have a little bit of that green in them, but they're on their way. So let's hop around and take a look at some other things. The little Joe Joe Pye weed is now pretty much in full flower. Showed it a couple weeks ago when it's, the flowers were still a bit more closed up on it, but it's opened up since I've been gone for a couple weeks, and the bees are just on it. You can't even count, honestly. I'm disturbing them and they're just moving to another flower. But this thing is just, it's probably the best thing in the landscape right this minute for the pollinators. So, highly recommend, whether you're buying the little Joe Pye weed or just a regular straight species native Joe Pye weed. Again, highly recommended. It's entertainment, if nothing else. Have lots of Encore azaleas in the landscape. I think there are actually 7 varieties out here. And with 7 varieties, there's almost always one that's blooming from spring until fall. So at least one of them is flowering. They don't all flower on some sort of exact schedule where they all open, in April, and then they all open again in the fall. So this autumn Debutante, which is tree formed, it's actually been limbed up into a small tree. For those of you who haven't seen it, it's opened 1 flower, has 2 more that are about to open, but it is completely covered in flower buds. And I think we're maybe 2 weeks away from this one being an absolute full flower. Really love this variety, this pale pink. Looks great, and the flower is big and it has a small leaf, and so the flower just seems almost exaggerated. But I'm looking forward to this one being in full flower. Behind it is a Fatshedra, and this one's called Angiostar. It's a variegated Fatshedra. If you haven't been following along with the channel, Fatshedra is half Fatsia and half English ivy, or a Hedra helix. And they were crossed together to create basically what amounts to a non-aggressive ivy. So it doesn't have anything that attaches itself to the wall. I've actually got it tied up here, got it zip tied up here to the wall. Won't hurt the paint, won't hurt the house. Grows much slower. Not as cold, anywhere near as cold hardy as English ivy. It unfortunately got a lot of its a lack of cold tolerance from its other parent, Fatsia, which is a zone 8. Shrub. I do have one, but it's up here against the house. But beautiful, beautiful plant. Kind of slow growing to start with, like most variegated, like you would expect from most variegated plants. But this year it has now jumped up. I'm 6 feet tall, and so it's right at 5 feet here in its 2nd season in the ground. Next up is this ScentAmazing Gardenia. This one is about to come back into what amounts to almost full flower. That was one of the reasons this one was selected. It just has this ability to bloom heavily in late spring, early summer, like the rest do, and then just will put on some new growth and then put on a new set of flowers. So it's extremely fragrant, extremely compact grower. This calla lily's got to be it's one of the things that's got to be pushed back a bit from it, but super compact grower. It's about 24 months in the ground at this point, and we're maybe 18 inches high and 24 inches wide at this point. Great dark green glossy foliage. Probably it doesn't need to flower, and then it does with these super fragrant flowers. But I just kind of wanted to point out that I am impressed by this variety. Some folks don't like the single flowers as much as the doubles, but this one ends up with 2 or 3 times more flowers because it's just constantly flowering. So great variety. I put up several pruning videos during the late spring months, getting some things under control. Again, those are coming again because there's lots of things that need some control. But this Shasta Viburnum was one of the things that I cut really, really hard. It had growth that was, out to here. It was all the way out to the path, where I'm standing here, about three additional feet on each side. And it had some pieces that were growing vertical right from the base, sports coming from the bottom that were just growing vertical. They didn't even have the proper habit. So this thing was really pruned very hard in that video. And I think at the end of that pruning, it may have looked like it would never look good again, but here we are a couple months later and it's starting to take that layered look again. But every single branch on this thing was just taken back about 3 feet, and I just did them equally all the way around. Since then, where it was cut, each of those places has multiple pieces of new growth that are about 2 feet long, and they'll all bloom in the spring, although there's a couple flower buds on it now. I have no idea why. Everything is so, there's so many things in the garden that are either blooming early, blooming at odd times, or whatever, but this one should look really great in the spring now. So one thing about this garden here in Raleigh is this is a very small lot, and this is a very wide growing shrub, and I'm a plant collector. If you had this in a spot where you could put it where it could get 8 or 10 feet wide, it would look better and perform fantastic. So just keep that in mind. This is not a plant. Some of the pruning you'll see me do in a small lot is just because I'm trying to cram a lot of plants into a small space, as opposed to if you have space for them, give them the space and let them take that free form, which I'm doing with this as well. I'm trying to prune them in such a way that they come back out with a free form, but I'd rather not have to prune it. There you go. This golden Oakland holly is really stunning in this container. It can go, I think ultimately it'll probably just go in the ground right where it is, but I had this big giant container that just looked fantastic, and it's looked fantastic in this space all along. There's some Asiatic jasmine planted down below it just to fill in the container right at the bottom, but I do really like this holly. I love the consistency and the variegation on this one. Most of the variegated hollies on the market, there are gold hollies where they just have gold on the new growth, and like that touch of gold holly that I showed last week. And then there are variegated hollies, and this is a variegated one where you have the yellow all along the edge of each leaf. This one has a consistency to it that I really, really like. Again, I've seen a lot of variegated hollies where they're half green, half variegated, or the variegation's very different leaf to leaf, but I appreciate the consistency of this one. Just like this video, the garden started in the back garden space. The front out here had this a diseased maple which was taken down. Stump was ground out, and it kind of delayed the start of the front garden project, almost a year behind the beginning of the back garden project. But this dwarf Hinoki cypress was, I think, the first plant added in the front garden space, and it has just done absolutely fantastic. It gets a ton of sun, and really once this got underway out here and you really start to, once the tree was gone and you really start to take a look at, how much sun something's getting, this thing's in the sun from 7 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon, full blazing sun, but it's done fantastic. I think that having the wood chips from the ground up maple having broken down in this space, compost was added to this space. I think it has things planted around its roots. That helps with it tolerating a little more sun than it probably would be happy in otherwise. If I just put it in a big giant open space and had mulch around it without other plants near it, without good organic material around its feet, I think it would be suffering, but it loves it. So Steph pointed out last week that we were starting to see some color on some of the asters, and here's one that has really opened up. This front annual border is really starting to show color like that. Everything peeking up through these gomphrena. The ageratum, just easy. I think that's that Blue Horizon ageratum. It's such a great plant. We've had that 2 years in a row. There's another one back there in the middle. The Celosia's looking good. And then if we'll just bring this camera down here, some more asters. We'll see some additional color on in the next week or two. And finally getting some marigolds through from the rabbits. This one's a small one, but these are actually big giant doubles. We'll see these get larger and larger as the season goes on, but they had to fight their way up through the rabbits, which absolutely love those things. So this front garden space continues to look great. One thing has just kind of replaced another as the season's gone on. There were some early flowering perennials that have that slow down in the heat of the summer, but other things have kind of taken over, including the agastache, which I showed you last week, and several other things coming along the front. Bee balm and things like that have slowed down. The butterfly towers, butterfly bush continues to be a standout out there. The white butterfly bush. It's so vertical. I'm probably going to give it a trim as part of the pruning. It's got so many spent flower buds on it. Deadheading butterfly bushes is one of those things. It's like, it seems like a lot of work. So typically, more often, what I'll do is just let them almost bloom. Where 2/3 of them are spent flowers, and then just prune the thing. And if I just do a little bit of pruning on it, it'll flush back out and be back in full bloom again. So that'll be my strategy on that one. Coming around the corner, you can see one of the Mexican sunflowers along the driveway in flower. There are lots of them all over the garden. Tithonia is just such an easy addition to the garden, and typically will bloom from midsummer right up until fall. This annual swoosh, which typically looks fantastic, needs some work. This brighter yellow melanospodium came back from seed and has snuck up through the middle without us being here. That bright yellow melanospodium snuck up and covers everything else up. So those are going to come out. And a few of the celosia that's sticking up taller than everything else. I think just literally, you're looking at what looks like a disaster, but just these things that are a foot taller than everything else comes out, and the rest of it looks great. I can see it underneath, but some of these self-seeding annuals can be, they can take over the garden pretty quickly. The Clethra has pretty much bloomed out at this point and needs a haircut. It goes on the haircut list, and as you can see across this bed toward me, there are lots of things in here that are going to need a small haircut. One other thing that got pruned during the pruning videos was a Serviceberry tree. It was staked with a large stake because when it was purchased, it had such a small trunk on it and had lots of growth on the top. This is so typical. I pruned it pretty harshly in the pruning video and slowed it down. The trunk is much more substantial. It definitely can hold itself up now. It's got a little bit of a lean to it, so I think I'm still going to have to put the stake back in it just over the course of this winter and get that slight lean, because it'll annoy me, honestly. So I'll get that slight lean out of it, but I no longer need to stake it for its own safety anymore. There's a few limbs. After you prune, you'll get a few limbs going back toward the middle. And so there's a couple things up in there I can see that I need to prune out to make sure they're not crossing one another in the future. And that's it. I'll just let it go from here. But I had to slow that tree down for its own, honestly, for its own safety, to let that trunk thicken up some. One other thing that was pruned hard in those pruning videos was the Cestrum parqui. In my area, in zone 7B, these can be killed, pretty much to the ground, or killed halfway to the ground. This one got killed to the ground and then had like 8 new branches, 10 new branches coming up from the ground for this year. So I had to get that under control in that video. I cut it down to 3 or 5, I can tell you, 5 main branches coming up. And you can see that now it's in full flower. Hummingbirds on this thing literally every time I walk out the front door. It is just amazing at drawing in the hummingbirds. I understand this plant is extremely invasive in Australia, but here in my area, the winter controls it. That's an interesting thing about some, plants being invasive or not invasive. Sometimes just having them in an area where winter, something like lantana, Lantana is exactly that way. It's not invasive for me here in Raleigh because it barely survives, but down in Florida, it's it can be extremely invasive. But Cestrum parqui, absolutely one of my favorites. It's a little funky. The foliage has got a really interesting smell to it, but the pollinators absolutely love it. It's a great, vibrant yellow. It never stops flowering. There's almost nothing you could put in your landscape if you're in zone 7B to 9 or 10 that would bloom like this all summer long. So there you go. There's a few of the highlights in the garden here in Raleigh in, what are we, right at the very end of July. Again, going forward, there's going to have to be a lot of pruning done out here. So you'll see some additional pruning videos, some additional how-to videos on those kinds of projects. Thanks for watching.